and every day.
They did that better in 1988, and Twins have called up a new outfielder, uh, Gilberto Celestino. I don't know if Rep Snyder, after his face plant in the wall, is out
Hmm.
again.
Guys, welcome. I'm going to keep adding people because this is likely going to be the biggest crowd we've ever had for this chapter. Welcome everyone. Stay on mute. I'm live from Baltimore. I believe our guest is live in Massachusetts, which you can tell you why in a few minutes. No other major announcements for chapter business. Those of you who are not on our email list and you want to be, either email me or add yourself via the SABR tool. One thing we did discuss, chapter board, is our local, semi-local. We will have our outing at the Orioles probably at the end of September. And our minor league outing this year will likely be a joint event with Philly chapters and a few others. The date and place is still to be determined. So we are extremely grateful, happy, proud. She's not only a chapter member, SABR member, and has been at many conventions over the years. She is a household name, and if you don't know her name, I would get off this call now and please go repent. She's a legend in baseball architecture, Orioles, Braves, Boston, and currently the executive vice president for planning and development. I think I got that right, with the world champion LA Dodgers. And she's been a friend to many of us in Baltimore for many years, including the Babe Ruth Birthday Place Foundation. So we're very pleased to have her, and I will shut up. Janet Marie, you can take it away, and thank you for joining us.
Well, I'm pleased that you all are having me, so thank you very much, and thanks for that overly generous introduction. I'm hoping that maybe you'll just ask me some questions so that you can lead me where you're interested in going. I did want to report my whereabouts. I'm in Worcester, Massachusetts, where I've been working with Larry Lucchino and Charles Steinberg, the duo that brought you Oriole Park at Camden Yards in 1992, on their latest adventure, which is a Polar Park, the AAA home for the Boston Red Sox. And we cut the ribbon on that just a few weeks ago, and yesterday marked the beginning of the end of COVID for Massachusetts, at least in terms of guidelines. So it was really fun to see a packed house at a baseball park once again. And it was nice to be with the two of them and to, over the last few years as we worked on this project, and to reminisce just how far baseball has gone from those early days of cutting the ribbon on Camden Yards to where we are today, where Camden Yards it sort of stands as the grandfather of that era of ballparks. It's hard to believe that Camden Yards turns 30 next year, and I realize a lot of times I'm speaking to groups like this one, and there's no one in the group who even remembers the predecessor to Camden Yards. They don't remember Memorial Stadium. They don't know the story of the multi-purpose parks. And while they may be fans of Oriole Park at Camden Yards or its cousins in San Diego, Denver, San Francisco, and Pittsburgh, are unaware of just how groundbreaking it was to not only move into a center city to build a baseball park, but to approach it architecturally as something that was really a part of the neighborhood and a part of the revitalization of an urban community. So having been around the track with Larry Lucchino a couple of times, this was especially rewarding to work on a minor league park, and just sort of the frivolity and fun that comes with building something that's for fewer than 10,000 fans, and thus has sort of the real intimacy to it, and the playfulness that comes from the minor leagues and how endearing that can be to a community. I'm counting on someone asking some questions or prompting me to go down a path, because I could go most anywhere, I think. So I see who's gonna monitor this. I see 2 hands raised, which I love.
We'll go with the Minnesota guy first, Steve Thornley.
Thank you. Hi, Janet Marie. You and Larry are mentioned in the latest edition of the book Green Cathedrals by Phil Lowry. And I guess he had the chance to meet with you when Oriole Park was being planned, and came up with the idea of having different kinds of glass in the warehouse. And if a ball hit a pane of glass and shattered, it was a home run. And if it bounced off, it was a ground rule double. And he claimed that you two were actually intrigued by it, but for practical reasons, it wasn't going to work. I mean, do you remember that? And how intrigued were you really?
Well, I'm embarrassed to say I don't remember that particular point, but I will say that Green Cathedrals was one of the few volumes on baseball parks that you could turn to in those days. I started working for the Orioles in 1989, and Larry had this idea that he wanted this ballpark to be that he wanted to harken back to the era of earlier parks. And so we set about to study what made those special and to try to sort of dissect them and quantify the features that they had in common. And today you could you could have a Zoom like this and you would have 30 experts because it's so well known and so well chronicled, and there's so many books and films and resources. And then that was one of the few volumes that was out there. And we did reach out to Phil and spoke with him at length about the book that he'd published and about the drawings that he had and about how to integrate the warehouse into the park. And there were some really fun ideas about making the warehouse wall a part of the field of play. But I think we had probably grown enamored with the idea of Utah Street continuing through the park and being an urban street that had a life beyond just baseball and bringing activity into the baseball park, even when there was not a game day. It was an idea that was sort of well documented in the RTKL master plan. And I think we also were a little bit afraid that if the warehouse itself was a part of the ballpark, that it would seem just a smidgen too cute. You know, there was even a sketch that I can recall John Palmer, who was a advisor to us, doing that did literally the mirror image of Fenway, where the warehouse became Baltimore's version of the Green Monster. But I think what was compelling about the site that Governor William Donald Schaefer chose or steered, I do, you know, it's hard, I think, if you don't know the governor, to believe that he personally picked that. But if you do know the governor, you can imagine he would have personally picked that because he so loved Baltimore. And this particular site lent itself to doing something really authentic. And I've always thought the stars were just so well aligned because the governor really loved Baltimore, loved downtown, understood intuitively that building downtown meant that the investment in streets, garages, bus stops, train stations, it was already there. You didn't have to spend more money on the infrastructure. And it added millions of people to the population that would patronize restaurants and hotels and the Baltimore waterfront, which was then, you know, pretty new. And then Larry, as I said a moment ago, had this dream about it being like, like Forbes Field or Ebbets or Fenway or Wrigley, and in terms of its asymmetry and small amount of foul territory and scoreboard in the field of play. Had either one of those gentlemen not had the other's dream, we could have ended up with a little Disneyland out in Laurel or Columbia, or we could have ended up with, just another boomerang shaped park in downtown Baltimore. So I've often thought that that was kind of amazing that probably neither of them realized just how lockstep their visions really were, though they were using different language and coming at it from a different place.
Bruce, you have a question?
Well, yeah, I want to say that it's very seldom that somebody works in baseball this long that is not a baseball fan. So I would like to know why you are a baseball fan.
I think I've always loved it as a sport because it is such a reflection of our culture, our individual cultures. I mean, it's a wonderful sport. I love the strategy. I love the pace. I love the storytelling that comes with it. I love the sort of family trees that intertwine generations. But I also love it for the reason that I got involved in the first place is that it really is I think of it as an urban sport. I think of it as a reflection of our cities. I love what it's meant to our cities. I think one of the things I'm most proud of is that Camden Yards set about a resurgence of not just baseball, but of sports moving into center cities and looking to be a part of that revitalization as opposed to an earlier era where they simply were used as a tool for wiping out, acres of land and sort of existing in a city rather than being of a city. But I think that's also true of, any community. I don't think baseball is just a reflection of, urban development, but it's just fun. The food, the seventh inning stretch, the way the national anthem is sung, just the traditions that go with baseball are also a wonderful reflection of any community and its sort of sense of itself.
Very nice. Very nice. Thank you.
Francis.
Janet Marie, I've admired your work, but I've never had the pleasure of meeting you in person. And this question, I don't know, you may have been asked before, but when you did work on Camden Yards, did you dream that it would set a precedent for so many changes in other stadiums?
No, I don't think any of us would have dared to be that presumptuous. I don't think you can, I realize a lot of people go into projects and say, we want to create a new paradigm. We want to, reinvent the wheel, but seldom do you ever really do that. And, as Larry Lucchino has often said, we set out to build the best ballpark we could for Baltimore. And I think the fact that so many other communities saw it as an opportunity to do something similar for themselves is a testament to how many things that Baltimore has been a trendsetter for. I think sometimes those of us in Maryland don't appreciate that everything from the transformation of the waterfront to bringing attractions like the aquarium and the convention center downtown were very forward-thinking ideas about urban growth and about cities. And I think this was another example of Baltimore and Maryland just being forward thinking about it. And I think the fact that it became something that we really look to as a model for other cities is a nice compliment, of course.
Mike, I'll get to you next. I'm going to jump in real quick. I have my Camden Yards 20th anniversary mug right here. I'm sure next year we'll have 30th anniversary stuff just in time for the SABR 50 convention. Getting away from Baltimore for a second, because we could stay on it all day. Can you talk about what changes you've done with the Dodgers since you've been there and the renovations and stuff, which was supposed to be for the All-Star game last year, And for those of us who haven't been to Dodger Stadium in a while, what's kind of new?
Well, I've been working now for Stan Kasten at the Dodgers since 2012. And this is the second really ginormous project that we've completed. If you know Dodger Stadium, you know that it's the largest park in the major leagues. It's the third oldest now behind Wrigley and Fenway. Seats 56,000, which seems just huge compared to what most clubs are aiming for these days, which is a number that starts with 3, 35, 36, 37,000. And it's a building that is so unique, and it's the only park from the 60s. It's got this mid-century modern architecture. It's carved into the hillside of Chavez Ravine. It's got these sort of funky hexagonal shaped scoreboards and this folded roof, and this beautiful view of both Elysian Park in the foreground and San Gabriel Mountains beyond. And so as more and more cities have moved into a traditional urban environment like Baltimore, it's made Dodger Stadium, even though it's only a mile from downtown Los Angeles, it will probably less, probably half a mile as the crow flies, it's made it seem even more unique. And yet, because it was designed in the 60s, it had features that that really were dated in terms of the way fans use the building. It's designed for fans to go in and sit in their seat and watch 9 innings of baseball and go home. And so there was no way to move around. Each level, you entered to the level you were on, you watched the game and you left. There was no vertical circulation, much less the 360 that has become commonplace as more and more we find fans who just don't want to sit still for 9 innings. And so this last project that we did tied together an expansion of each entry, added 5 new elevators, 4 bridges, 4 escalators, things that, you might roll your eyes and think, what's so big about that? But Dodger Stadium is such a crazy place that it's essentially took the footprint and expanded this apron around it. And yet, if you look at it on television or just the postcard view, our goal was to make it not look any different, but to make it behave a little more like fans expect today, with standing room areas and bars where you can watch the game without ever actually taking a seat, and kids areas, cooking and sort of the smells of barbecue. And it's really been well received by fans, although we don't open up until January the 15th to 100% in California. So we're still kind of waiting to cut the ribbon on this project that was scheduled to be finished in April of 2020.
Mike Armstrong, you got a question?
Yeah, thanks. Hi, I'm real curious on your experience in Worcester right now. What's the few things that you've been able to do there that might not fly if you were working on a major league stadium right now?
Well, let's see. One thing that we're doing is something that Larry Lucchino really advocated for, and I'll have to sort of tell you the whole story to put this in context. But when we started this project, minor league baseball was still minor league baseball, and we were operating under one set of guidelines that required AAA to be 10,000 seats, or at least 10,000 capacity. And those terms are not really interchangeable, right? Capacity, 10,000 fans versus 10,000 seats are slightly different things. So I think if you look at AAA across the board, no matter what city they're in, and the Woo Sox, as many of you may know, were the Paw Sox just a year ago. They were in Pawtucket, Rhode Island, and had a long and rich tradition of being in Pawtucket at a much loved little ballpark, McCoy Stadium. And yet, with the exception of July 4th and fireworks nights, they almost never hit 7,000, 8,000 fans. So to use the old adage of not designing a church for Easter Sunday, Larry's idea was that we would design for 10,000 capacity so that we would meet minor league baseball's rules, but that we would only have some 6,000 or 7,000 fixed seats. And the rest of it would be grassy berms or sort of a triple decker as an homage to the triple deckers in Worcester that have bar stools and drink rails and just places to hang out and watch the game, but they're not fixed seats. We did an open concourse with the drink rail all the way around it. So you can come early and grab a stool right behind home plate for the same $9 ticket that someone sitting in the grassy berm in the outfield has. You can sit there for a few innings or the whole game. There are no rules with a GA ticket. And that, I think, is something you can do when you're working with a capacity of 10,000 or less. I think if you go to 30 or 40, as you would in the major leagues, you would not dare take 20% of your seats and have them as a GA ticket. You might take 2,000 of them and have them as a GA ticket. You might still have the same number of people wandering around, but it wouldn't be the same percentage. So that's really been fun to watch evolve. Last night they had thousands of school kids who had been given tickets courtesy of a local business. And, those kids were swarming the place like there was no tomorrow. And they were sitting in very different places than had a group like us been given free tickets to the game. It was just fun to watch and fun to see how people sort of find their own, like water, sort of find their own level in a place like that. So that was something I would say is very different about working at that scale that you couldn't translate easily to the major leagues. I don't know who our moderator is, but I see it. Francis has his hand raised.
Yes. Well,
and I got to apologize. I probably need to be zooming around from page to page because I think I have more than one page of hands. So sorry, just speak up if I can't see.
yeah. Well, my question here, and I may not phrase it correctly because I know you've accomplished so much and had so many successes, but could you describe perhaps any of the frustrations you might have had through the years and perhaps barriers thrown your way by people or, of course, I'm not asking for specific names or anything, but just
I won't tell you about
obviously your work
misbehaved people.
I'm sorry.
I said I won't tell you about anybody who was misbehaving. But
yeah, well, I know everything couldn't have gone perfectly through all this stuff. That somehow along the line you probably had some frustrations, and I was wondering what they might have been.
Well, it's a good question. You're right. If projects as complicated as this are not, if they were smooth sailing, they probably wouldn't turn out very well. I think it's often the challenges and the competing goals that you have to manage that cause them to be so interesting. I guess there's sort of several fronts that you try to manage. And it depends, of course, a lot on the setting, but you're always sort of managing public versus private interest. And that's a challenge in and of itself. And I have really enjoyed, being an advocate for the public interest sometimes, even when the public sector is not there to advocate for themselves. And I think it's sort of our responsibility as, as America's pastime and as an occupant of these urban buildings to behave like a good urban building and be a good neighbor and make certain that we're not shuttered, even when we're not playing baseball, that we keep a community and a neighborhood alive, that we take advantage of the investment that cities have made in their infrastructure. And yet that's, you can't quantify or put a value on that, but you have to trust that there's merit in doing that and that value comes to you from making those gestures. even as it's sort of easy to look at the revenue sources for baseball and realize that they're measured in sponsorship and tickets and television and much more quantifiable things. And so I think there's a balance of how you approach that. There's also a balance, I think, with everything from signage ordinances that cities have to how you manage, like when we were working on the renovation of Fenway, we had to work with the National Park Service at the federal level, the State Historic Commission at the state level, and then the Boston Landmarks Commission at the local level for changes to Fenway Park. And so there is a very important role that government plays, and you need to find a way to work within those parameters. You can't just be fighting that all the time. And so that's always a little bit complicated and sometimes fun. And I've learned some great things along the way. One of my favorite stories about the renovation of Fenway, or favorite memories, is not, I don't know if it make a good story or not, I'll try. But when we were working on Fenway Park and we had decided to apply to be on the federal registry so that we would be eligible for the historic tax credits, we often celebrate the fact that Fenway is the oldest park in the major leagues and it's been around since 1912. But the truth of the matter is that the 1912 portion is a very modest part of what's left at Fenway. Most of what defines the Fenway Park that we look at and take pictures of and think about as being old is the 1934 portion of Fenway Park. And then there's some changes that were made in the 1950s that are considered historically significant. And so there was the question of what are we preserving? What era are we preserving? And as I said, the public and even us at the Red Sox like to sort of celebrate the 1912, even knowing in our heart of hearts that not much of 1912 was remaining. And one of the things about the 1912 park that defined it was the monochromatic seats. They were all painted green, as was the custom of the day. You had these wooden seats, and you can imagine the painter going through, and they weren't going to try to do too many innovative things, just keep the seats coated with paint, not so much for the look, but just to protect the wood. And yet, over the years, Fenway had become a park that had 3 different color seats. The 1934 seats, which are still there, were painted dark blue. The bleacher seats were green. The seats that are sort of the better seats closer to the field had been replaced in the 70s with red seats. And so it had these 3 different color seats. And as a little bit of Baltimore in this story, one of the things that defined Camden Yards as being different is that we too went to monochromatic seats, something that was today is old hat, no story there. But in 1989, when we said we were going to do all green seats, there was a story. They're like, why? Everybody else was color coding their sections. And yet we thought at Fenway that if we went to all green seats as they had been in 1912, that it wouldn't be nearly as distinctive as the 3 colors that had been around for almost 50 years at that point in time. And so I called Bronna Simon, who was the head of the review body for the state and thus the National Park Service, and also a huge Red Sox fan. She really knew Fenway Park well. And we talked it through over the course of several weeks. And Bronna's advice was, you're not preserving an object under glass. You're not trying to rewind the clock. You're looking to protect and preserve and keep for the future. And if that's the defining feature, it doesn't matter that it's not 1912, it's 1960s. So sorry to have gotten off on that tangent, but it's just a reminder that even the things that sometimes seem like barriers end up being actually a path to something really wonderful.
Robert, you have your hand up? Gotta get off mute.
There we go. I had to unmute myself. Hi, Janet. My question is regarding the Worcester Ballpark. I understand that it's a downtown ballpark, though, but I'm wondering if you talk about its location and how it interacts with the surrounding neighborhood.
Well, it's on a site that was occupied by Wyman Gordon, an industry that was critical to Worcester's growth in the early part of the 1900s, and yet they shrunk and moved and consolidated and ended up with a very modest footprint and modest workforce in Worcester by the 1980s. So there's about 50 acres of land in downtown Worcester that has been surface parking for decades now. And Polar Park, which is the name of the Woo Sox new ballpark, occupies about a third of that, immediately adjacent to the Canal District, which is this very funky, wonderful, organic growth of bars and restaurants and retail antique stores and fun areas immediately adjacent to it. And so the city of Worcester and the developer, Madison Properties, who brought this opportunity to the then Paw Sox, introduced it as a way of revitalizing Worcester's downtown and the Canal District. And we aren't pioneers by any means. Those who started all the growth in the Canal District a decade ago really get the credit for that. But hopefully the thousands of fans who come 50 some odd nights a year for baseball will help those restaurants to grow. And we've already seen the property immediately adjacent to the ballpark be gobbled up by those who are looking to build residential in the area, which we think is net a good thing. And certainly the developer who brought us into this is looking to create an identity for his residential buildings by having baseball as a part of the neighborhood. I think sometimes because I work so much on the building and on how fans experience baseball and how you grow a fan and how you try to engage kids, young people, millennials, how you make it a generationally interesting sport. There's a lot of my work that's focused on bringing other things to the ballpark that make people want to come, whether or not they're hanging on to every pitch. And I find that sometimes even in forums like this, I get so far away from the game itself that it sometimes takes a little bit of a reset in the conversation to remember we're there to watch baseball. And one thing I particularly enjoyed about working with the Red Sox on this project is that we were struggling with our field dimensions because we loved this particular site because it forced an asymmetry, something that Larry Lucchino has always loved, but you don't want it to be fake. But the site, because of its geographic boundaries with the railroad on one side and the Canal District on the other side, and an elevation change that drops about 30 feet from north to south, it meant that we were going to have not only an asymmetrical playing field, but we were also going to have a tall wall in right field. It's the exact opposite of Fenway Park, of course. And so we talked to the Red Sox about that because many of you probably know that one of their little fun facts about their spring training facility, JetBlue Park in Fort Myers, is that it is the exact same dimensions as Fenway Park, with even it's something that passes for the Green Monster, at least in terms of its dimensions, in left field. And so here we were looking to plan a AAA park and expecting, since we're only 50 miles from Fenway, that we would forever be the AAA affiliate of the Red Sox, but doing a tall wall in right field. And their baseball analytics team spent a lot of time studying the playing field and looking at not only the square footage of the foul territory, the square footage of the fair territory, the height of the fences. And one of the things that they were most focused on wasn't just the relationship of the outfield wall heights to the dimension, but the amount of square footage that was in the outfield, and making certain that it was sort of in the same ballpark, no pun intended, as Fenway, in order to create the kind of training facility that they wanted. And that was really interesting to me to see. We hear a lot about analytics in baseball, but it was interesting to me to see how they applied that to the playing field itself, and to how that was going to be designed, and the role they played in that. So that was sort of a interesting part of the design process for me that I had not experienced before.
Perry?
Hi, Janet Marie.
Hey, Perry, how are you?
Good. So,
Nice to see you.
oh, thanks. I just want to tell you that any changes you make to Dodger Stadium are fine with me, as long as you keep those garlic fries on the upper level. Okay?
They're not going anywhere, believe me.
Okay, good. And my favorite thing at the new Dodger Stadium is the trunk display that you put up a few years ago. I just love that. And I love the story of how you were inspired to create it. But before you tell us that story, I just want to add one thing. I've seen several comments on social media the last few days. I'm not really sure why, but people are saying you should be in the Hall of Fame, which definitely you should be and you will be. But I explained to them that according to the rules and regulations of eligibility, you are not currently eligible. So we will just have to be patient until you reach 70 years old or are retired 5 years from baseball, whichever comes first. And that when that time comes, that there is already a growing movement of people who definitely have your back.
Oh, Perry.
I know you are modest and unassuming, and you probably will not advocate for yourself, but I mean, the impact that your designs and creative processes have had on baseball are just incalculable. And
Well,
there's nobody who deserves to be in there more than you do.
you're amazing. I mean, you're wonderful to say that, but it's an awkward position because my job is to lead a team. You know, there's so many people who are involved, from the architects to the graphic designers to the people in the front office who've shaped it, and goodness knows without Larry Lucchino or Stan Kasten or
But
Peter
it's
Angelos.
okay. It's okay to be the face of all of that.
Well,
And you should, and as usual, you're giving all the credit to other people, and that just goes to the kind of wonderful,
well,
modest person you are.
well,
So,
it's right and appropriate too, though. But can I tell the story of the trunks? Because
the
I
trunk.
love that
Yeah.
story too. So what Perry is referring to is a display of trunks, just what it sounds like, traveling trunks, that the Dodgers had had since the days of Brooklyn. And we found them out in a trailer in our parking lot. I guess somewhere along the way, the Dodgers just simply ran out of storage, and it rains very little in Southern California. And so instead of worrying about the fact that there are storage rooms at Dodger Stadium, they just rented some trailers and put things out there. And one of the trailers was full of these trunks, and the Dodgers had used them up through the 80s, and they just painted over them. And as the paint peeled off, you could see the words Brooklyn telegraphing through. And so we unloaded those things from out of the trailer, along with a bunch of other prize things, which I can tell you about in a moment. And we just brought them into Dodger Stadium and set them up as a little photographic moment. And what's fun about it is, as we started really looking at photographs of the Dodgers over the years, you can see those trunks in so many photographs in the clubhouse. And so we chose two to put with the trunks, one of Jackie Robinson sitting on those trunks, and one of our Hall of Fame manager, Walter Alston, standing on those trunks, giving a little pep talk, I guess, in the clubhouse. And it's really kind of fun because those things, they're magical. And if you go through Dodger Stadium, you'll see that we put things like that out throughout that building. And I often kind of smile to myself because I think a true historian going through there would say it's not properly curated, but you know what? I often say it may be junk, but it's our junk. And so we tried to display it as artfully as we could and tell the story as best we could. And I think those are kind of the fun moments about baseball. And one of the reasons we love the pace of it is it allows you to completely ignore those things. You don't have to look at those kinds of displays to enjoy the game. But if it's of interest to you, there are a lot of levels of discovery in a place like Dodger Stadium. And I really enjoyed being a part of that end of the spectrum too. I got into this because I enjoyed the planning and the architecture, but I found just as much inner enthusiasm for the history and the graphic depiction of the game as I have the bricks and mortar. So that's been a lot of fun. And I think as fans have grown to carry a camera and their phone around in their pocket, it's become sort of a natural piece of entertainment to have those things out and available for fans to see. And players too. That's the other thing that I'm often reminded of a moment when I was working for the Orioles years ago, and Roland Heeman asked me if I would give a presentation of what we were planning at Camden Yards to the players. And I said to him, I felt silly talking to players about the ballpark and about how we were designing this playing field. And, I look forward to getting their input, but I felt they just knew so much more about it. And then he stopped me and he said, no, because they're good athletes doesn't necessarily mean they're either fans themselves or that they know the game or the history, much less sort of the story of the parks and the role they have played in shaping the game. And I kind of carried his commentary and advice about how to approach that with me all these years, because I find there really are a lot of players who've not thought about some of the things that you all are asking about this evening.
Thank you.
So Perry, I can't sort of skip over talking about the design of ballparks with you on a Zoom call without saying something about one of my disappointments is that maybe about 20 years ago, baseball started asking that we always design our umpires' rooms to be available for women as well as men. And I'm struck by the fact that we started doing that 20 years ago and have yet to see those rooms used the way they were intended. And buildings that plan for that, as they were asked to, like Citizens Bank Park in Philadelphia.
And you've done that down in the Dominican Republic as well, right?
Well, we did that the Dodgers, when we redid our facility, we did a clubhouse for women and as well as men. And at first, our architects there were like, really, are you going to spend money on that, putting square footage in for that? And we at the time had women who were trainers in Los Angeles. And so we felt it was just a matter of time before we would in the Dominican as well. And sure enough, just as sheer coincidence, the Dodgers hired a woman to be head of the training facility in the Dominican. And she had been there for about 3 weeks, not knowing that we had designed the clubhouse for her. It hadn't properly been signed, and so she didn't realize that it was there. And when she did, she was at once pleased, but she also had a suggestion that that we remedied as best we could, and I'll take with me to the next project, which was to have the dressing facilities separate, but to make certain that the clubhouse and the social and the strategic areas where you spend time, that you're able to be with your male colleagues so that you have the privacy of showering and dressing in your own area, but you don't lose the camaraderie of being together as you're planning the game or as you're chilling out after the game. And so I do think I've learned a lot from the few women who've been in those positions.
Yeah, well,
And
thank you very much. It means a lot. And one of these days, all those rooms that are actual dressing rooms for women that are currently broom closets will fulfill their function.
I know, I say that all the time, like, don't let that mascot get too comfortable in there, because we have to send them back to their own dressing room just the minute we finally cross what seems to have been, to me, umpiring, to have been, maybe should have been one of the easiest hurdles for women to break down. So kudos to you for doing that. But we're waiting for the floodgates to open.
Yeah, one of these days.
Yeah, well, you learn and appreciate that breaking a barrier doesn't always open the floodgates. And
Oh, it won't. It will just be one or two or a few very dedicated, ambitious, talented women. Men have nothing to fear. It's not going to be a raging torrent of estrogen crazed banshees shrieking at the men to get out of the way. It's really not going to happen like that at all. I promise you.
I have a question, but I want to make sure that I've already asked one, or if there's others who wanted to ask. Or, you know, we're all here for the baseball, the ballparks, and obviously with everything you've done, you know, city planning, things like that. I don't know exactly what your background is with urban planning, but I think you did a significant project in the Battery in my favorite city, New York. Talk about that, or just urban planning outside of baseball.
Well, I'm so pleased you asked, because that is, there is a connection there. Battery Park City in New York was one of the first projects I had a chance to work on after I finished architecture school. And I did get a degree in urban planning while I was working on that project. And one of the hallmarks of that is that for many decades in the 60s, 70s, New York was presuming that 92 acres of landfill at the tip of Lower Manhattan opposite the World Trade Center would be a sort of standalone community. Not really connected architecturally or urbanistically to Lower Manhattan, simply kind of coexisting with it, being maybe sort of towers on a podium, not the scale of the World Trade Center, but the same idea. And during the early 80s, Cooper Eckstedt developed a master plan that sort of blew those ideas out of the water, quite literally, and extended the streets of Lower Manhattan to the waterfront, created a waterfront esplanade, a series of buildings that sort of looked and felt like the rest of Lower Manhattan, with street walls, retail on the ground floor, setbacks on the towers above, an articulated rooftop. And I really felt that being in New York was a lesson in urban design in and of itself. I mean, that's honestly the reason I moved to New York. At the time, I didn't care so much about what job I had. I just wanted to be in New York City, but I ended up with this great job that really was a way of learning more about the city itself. And though I worked in Los Angeles before I moved to Baltimore to work on Camden Yards, it was in many ways those lessons that I had learned at Battery Park City about being how to develop a city and how to respond to the cityscape, that gave me a chance to work with HOK and RTKL on the footprint for Camden Yards and the notion of saving the warehouse and using it as a guideline, both architecturally and urbanistically, for how Camden Yards would be oriented and how it would nestle into the city. And HOK had some, really worked hard to sort of think about that scale, and not just how do you save the warehouse, but the idea of sinking the playing field and then doing a setback on the upper deck so that the building, even though it's 110 feet from the playing field to the last row of seats in the upper deck at Camden Yards, the masonry of the building itself along Russell Street is only 55 feet. So architecturally, it looks like it's half the size it really is, which makes it a very good neighbor to those row houses that are only 30 and 40 feet across the street. So some of those lessons and guidelines about responding to the cityscape work just as well with ballpark architecture as they do with the creation of a neighborhood.
Anybody else? Hands, questions for Janet Marie? Bruce, go ahead.
Yeah, Maria, I want to follow up on Francis's question earlier. And I want you to name names. For example, was there ever an instance where someone deliberately contravened your plans to a situation where it was too late for you to correct it?
I don't, no, I don't think so. And it's not because I don't think bad. I think I'm a pretty good advocate for the things that make these places special. And there's a fine balance between being diplomatic and being being diplomatic and finding compromise and finding a path to do the right thing for the building while satisfying these competing interests.
So you've done enough advanced work that it's just not going to happen.
Well, I don't want to say it's not going to happen, but you try to be a good advocate for these buildings, and I often, I guess we all feel like we have some sort of secret superpower, and I think mine is the ability to channel what a building wants to be. I sort of feel like if I spend enough time in a place and really think about it, I can be a voice for it. And so I don't know that I'm always right, but I probably have, I've probably been asked to take on jobs that were well suited for that perspective. So maybe it ends up being a little self-selecting. And I think it should not go unnoticed that I've worked for Larry Lucchino on 3 projects and Stan Kasten on 2. So I've had some sort of repeat courses to my work. And that's why I think it's so important to note the challenges that they've given me and the work they've entrusted me to do. So that's not an accident there.
Okay, well, I have a follow-up question that's not related. I wonder if you would explain the meaning of that poster that we see in back of you on the wall.
I can. Do you know that poster?
No, it looks like ballparks.
It is. This one is a graphic designer, Lou Sporetto, who was once upon a time, I didn't know him then, but once upon a time he was an illustrator for the Baltimore Sun, and he now lives in California. And he put that together, and I love it.
Is it different ballparks?
It is, yeah. It's the 30 major league ballparks, and it's just the dimension of the playing field. I think it's a few years old. I asked him recently if I could get some copies of that for Polar Park, and he said absolutely, but not that one. He said I'm going to update it and send it to you. So he does I don't, I feel, I think his website is, I think his website is 3030. I want to say, I could look it up and I can let you know, but I think it's 30 spelled out and then 30. At any rate, yes, that is what it is. And he would be flattered that you noticed.
Well, it's very distinctive.
It is beautiful, isn't it? I mean, to me, it's sort of the most interesting thing about baseball is that it's not set field dimensions, that they're all different. And I love how he's depicted that graphically so beautifully, just so clean and beautiful.
Well, we Sabre people are kind of fanatics about a lot of things. And one of them is visiting as many ballparks as we possibly can. So I can see a person like myself using that as a checklist.
Well, it's interesting for a lot of people. They get through that list and before they can make it to 30, there's a new one on there. So
Right.
I've always enjoyed sort of the I've been to 46, So,
Right.
like, yeah, how do you do that? You can only do that if you span certain generations.
Yeah,
But it is
I only count the ones where I've been to 2 in the same city. The one that is replaced.
How many ballparks total, major league and minor league, have you redesigned or worked on?
Well, the ones that I think of as mine, is different from, can you come look at it and give us some ideas? But the ones I think of as, that I had real responsibility for were Camden Yards, and then the transformation of the Olympic Stadium in Atlanta to Turner Field, the renovation of Fenway, the renovation of Ed Smith Stadium in Sarasota for Peter Angelos, and Dodger Stadium, and now Polar Park. I can add to that list, I think.
So 6. That's pretty impressive.
Yeah. So it's been a lot of fun, and I've met some fun characters along the way and learned a lot. I know those of you who know the story of Camden Yards know what an important role Frank Robinson played in advocating for the dimensions and of Camden Yards, and what an important voice he was in supporting this idea of an asymmetrical playing field and the scoreboard in the field of play, and the advantage it gave to the hometown team. And today those kinds of things sound like sort of yawn. Yeah, I've heard it. But any of you who were around then may remember what a head scratcher it was for a lot of people, particularly state legislatures who are like, what, we're going to spend new money on an old-fashioned idea? Like, what sense does that make? But maybe it made no sense to them hearing it from either Larry Lucchino or from me or even HOK Sport, but hearing it from Frank Robinson, that was another story. So Frank not only played an important role in shaping the park, but I really feel that he played an important role in advocating and using the credibility and the notoriety that he brought as our manager to that discussion. I also felt really lucky when Peter Angelos asked me to come back to work for the Orioles for the 20th anniversary of Camden Yards, and we did some improvements to Camden Yards while we were working on Ed Smith Stadium, that they had hired Buck Showalter to be our manager. And he really loved anything about the architecture. He was just interested in that. And so when we were working on Ed Smith Stadium, he had a lot of input into the training facilities and the relationship of the practice fields to the agility field to the weight room. And he really pushed us hard to use the graphics as sort of teaching moments. And we put up, just to tell the story to players, we put up the retired numbers. We put up, we worked with Buck to do this graphic with these words that would inspire sort of passion and strength. We took our cartoon logo bird and Ashton Design converted him into this kind of tough bird lifting weights, and we used that graphic in the clubhouse because Buck didn't want it to feel like it was Disney World in there. And just the whole storytelling of how we put these graphics together ended up being so interesting to him that he would do a trivia question. He'd give like a pop quiz to his players and say, here's a pop quiz on the Orioles history, and you can find the answers in this clubhouse somewhere, just look. And I thought that was fun. I've often thought we should do that with fans too.
John? You're on mute, John.
I'm muted.
There you go.
Gary, as you mentioned, Camden Yards started bringing ballparks downtown, and not just in the major leagues. I see Francis up there in North Carolina, Durham and Greensboro, beautiful, two new beautiful ballparks. I don't know, across the minor leagues. But you mentioned Turner Field, which I thought was from where I went, it was a very nice stadium. But Atlanta went from downtown to the suburbs. And that's I guess the last ballpark, the last new ballpark, was that Atlanta?
No, the Rangers have built a new one.
Okay, the Rangers, that's right. And they're kind of out in the middle of every place, in the middle. Do you sense that there may be a shift in thinking as to where future ballparks will be?
Well, I think what you're seeing is a shift in two things that are related. One is Camden Yards, Concourse Field would be examples of teams that moved into an existing urban setting and worked hard to be of that setting and to spur other growth in the urban center. Those ballparks both had a fair amount of public backing. As the funding mechanism has shifted to put the burden of building the ballpark on the team itself, one of the ways that teams have justified the investment is to control the development around it. And so there are times that ends up being financially beneficial, and sometimes it ends up being just sort of environmentally beneficial. But I think what you see with the Braves is a good example of a desire to control their environment, both in terms of the experience and I'm sure financial, because we're not making money, we're losing money. It's still a business. And I think one of their frustrations with Turner Field was that Atlanta chose to build the Olympic Stadium there because they had to meet the deadline of the '96 Olympics, and it was the only parcel of land that they owned that was big enough to accommodate a new Olympic Stadium. But it wasn't in a particularly strategic location in terms of its ability to rejuvenate a neighborhood or take advantage of mass transit. And the Braves had tried to persuade the Atlanta-Fulton County Stadium Authority to allow them to develop the parking lots around Turner Field, which they were denied the opportunity to do. And I think they just felt they were, while within the city of Atlanta, they didn't have the benefit of the energy around a ballpark that has come to be so integral to the way baseball has evolved. And so with their new venue, while it may not be in the city, they have created a neighborhood around it. So yes, I certainly do see that trend. I don't know that it bodes well for older American cities that that we know and love, but I do see that trend. And I think the Rangers are hoping, even though they only moved across the street, I think they are hoping that their new ballpark gives them a chance to do more in terms of development there.
Okay. Yeah, it was a nightmare getting to that Turner Field if you were using MARTA, because then you had to take a bus from underground land
Exactly.
into the stadium.
Right.
That was really a bad thing. But I thought it was an excellent place to watch a ball game. Yeah.
You mentioned 1912 Fenway. When I go into Williams Arena in Minneapolis, I always like to try to think what's here that goes back to 1928. And so what is there that we'd see at Fenway? I guess the exterior, the bricks in the home plate area. Inside, are there things to look for that will take us all the way back to the beginning?
There are. You kind of have to know what you're looking for, but I'll tell you, you're absolutely right. The tapestry facade on Jersey Street that has 1912 scripted into the limestone. That's obviously 1912. And when you walk in that portion, and it's only a small segment underneath the grandstand, between about halfway between home and third, and just around past between home and first. So it's a very small section right behind, right kind of behind home plate. And if you look up, you can see that in the 1912 section is poured concrete, and you can see the formwork and a sloped, I'll call it a roof for lack of a better word. And then as soon as you pass to where that roof is stepped, you're in the 1934 portion. And there's one little lone archway that's about 3 feet wide that we uncovered, that was once a side door to the 1912 Fenway. And once we uncovered it, we cleaned it up and sort of made it look nice again, and put the 1912 trophy in that, turn it into essentially a trophy case. But you can tell by looking at it that it was once a door, and we put a photo there so you can see what it was like.
Well, thanks. I'll look for it next time.
Francis?
Years ago, there was quite a controversy in Detroit about Tiger Stadium and its replacement by Comerica Park. Just wondered, as somebody in the field, do you believe if that project had come your way, do you think you could have saved Tiger Stadium?
Well, yes, of course. And I never went to Tiger Stadium. I of course know it from photographs and stories and history. And I think the difference in perhaps the difference, I don't know, if you know it, you would know better than I, but it was a neighborhood park, right? Whereas Comerica Park is in the urban center. And I think the Tigers, I don't know if they just wanted a new facility, or if they really believed that being part of the urban environment was a better answer. But it's hard for me to say. I suspect my preservation instincts would have tilted toward trying to save the old one. But I certainly can appreciate what the new one has done for downtown Detroit. And I guess, to be honest, I feel that way in a sense about the work that I've been doing for the Red Sox. I love Little McCoy Stadium, and I still love it. I hope it has some future. But I certainly appreciate what this facility in Worcester does for building a new audience and bringing life to downtown Worcester, and sort of the joy that it brings to see so many people beating down the gates for the second night in a row now that COVID has at least momentarily taken a step back.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you.
Larry?
That discussion just reminded me of a question I'd be curious about. Alongside the stadiums you've done, what are the other stadiums that you particularly like?
Well,
in the major leagues.
Yeah, well, I think it's probably, my answer is no different from any other baseball fan. I love San Francisco and Pittsburgh's parks. I think they're beautifully done, and the architecture is a real reflection of those communities, and both of those parks have done a lot for their neighborhoods. I think we'll sort of, I think we're going to be sorry to lose every single multi-purpose park there is. There's, it's water over the bridge, but I think it's too bad that we couldn't have saved one, and too bad it might not have been one of the most beautiful ones. Like I always thought Busch Stadium with the sunroof that reflected the St. Louis Arch had some really beautiful qualities. And nobody has been, I've certainly been on the soapbox for years about multi-purpose stadiums and how much better it is for baseball to be in a baseball-only park. But I think just as Dodger Stadium has earned a place in history by being so different from every other park, I think when there's no multi-purpose stadium left, we'll miss having one dinosaur still amongst us.
Thank you.
Well, technically, we still have RFK at the moment.
Well, technically, but they're not playing baseball there, so
Correct.
not playing anything there. Oakland was much more interesting. Again, I didn't know it pre-Raiders, but just looking at the plans, and it was when Oakland first opened, it was revered in architectural circles. It was designed by Skidmore, Owings and Merrill, very well-respected firm, and probably one of the great architects of that era. So I know it was born with better bones than what we see now.
Were you ever asked to either assist or for your insight in maybe for renovations at Wrigley since you did Fenway?
Yes, I had a chance to go spend on several occasions to go to Chicago and talk to the Cubs about what we had done at Fenway and try to share both some of the actual steps that we'd taken and just the process as well, because there is something very challenging about a renovation, just logistically. You need to plan during the season, do your construction in the off season, be ready to start up again in April. And so there is a challenge involved in just the cycle of those phases to get to a complete renovation when you can't just do it all at once.
What was the first ballpark with the open concourse? Do you know?
To the best of my knowledge, it was probably New Comiskey, which opened in 80. Was it 91? 91.
Okay.
But I could be wrong. So if somebody else knows differently, please tell me, because I'm not.
Yes,
sure.
Toronto was open before that. Sky Dome was open in 89 with an open concept.
Toronto also worked really hard to have nice retail frontage. And I think Toronto ended up growing up after the Sky Dome had kind of planned that. So be interesting to see how they end up pulling all that. They're talking about redoing that, but some of their original ideas were pretty strong.
Oakland has a really neat design for their whole new ballpark and waterfront area. Is that going to happen? It seems like
I have no insights into it.
Okay, but
No
seems like
idea.
politically, but it really looked nice. I saw pictures of it.
Yeah, it is.
Could you mention some of the strengths and weaknesses of the Sky Dome? And if any plans for a new one or remodeling or reconstruction of it to make it more.
I don't have any insights that anybody else would have, but what I admired about it initially, at least as an urban building, was that they intended to have retail on the ground floor. and to open up onto the city and really, so even when baseball wasn't being played, there were things there. And I think the neighborhood really wasn't quite ready for that. And I think some of those retail spaces ended up being taken over and used as offices and things that really didn't do much to activate the street. But now Toronto has grown up so much, I imagine they wish they could rewind the clock on some of those things.
Looks like somebody asked, do you think old Yankee Stadium could have been preserved and modernized?
You know, I never studied it, so I can't say. I always feel like everything could be given a chance. There was something about old Yankee Stadium that I really love that that's hard to translate to a new building. Sort of the grittiness and the lack of perfection. That, but I know the Yankees are happy with their new building, but I kind of like the old stuff. I guess in a way I don't want to see ballparks get too perfect and too finished. I think one trend that I've seen is for sports facilities to become more and more what I would call finished, you know, instead of looking up and seeing steel trusses and open mechanical systems, you now see enclosed ceilings, and the sort of bones are buried in that in trade of a more finished look. And I still like seeing the rawness of the structure itself. I think it sort of goes with the sunshine and the grass. You know, it's an outdoor building, so why try and make it seem like a hotel?
Following up on that question, I had a friend who lived in New York, and he was sure that Yankee Stadium, the original Yankee Stadium, was going to last forever. Are there any ballparks other than Fenway and Wrigley that have enough history and so forth to really last, or are in 10 years, are we going to see some of these ballparks that were built to last forever being replaced?
Well, I think that is we are already seeing that, right? We just talked about both the Braves and the Rangers leaving parks that were 20 years old, that had no structural flaws, in favor of something that suited their current needs. So absolutely, I think teams do still have different mindsets about how to approach that. I'd say Dodger Stadium is, I may be too close to it to be a impartial advocate for it, but I think it's so unique that it stands on its own. You know, Wrigley and Fenway sort of have each other as reference points for that classic era of ballparks. But I think Dodger Stadium, with its unique 60s feeling, is a totally different kind of atmosphere, and one that I think is more and more celebrated as time goes on for its uniqueness.
Say, Janet, I'm wondering if you can comment on New Comiskey Park. It was built the year before Camden Yards, of course, though. And when it opened to great criticism, though, because of the pitch of the upper deck, among other things, though. And then after the White Sox got sponsorship, or I should say, naming rights for the ballpark, they put that money into ballpark improvements. I think they lopped off about 5 to 10 rows of the upper deck, and they added some other amenities. Added some amenities to the ballpark. I'm wondering if you can comment on the renovations that were done some years back to New Comiskey on that regard.
Well, I think they did a nice job of kind of toning it down and addressing some of the criticisms. You're absolutely right. It was the steep upper deck that fans felt was, gave them vertigo. And they did two things. As you say, they cut off the last few rows of seats. And they also put they started out with sort of a sunroof at kind of a pitched angle, and they put more of flat roof on it that I think gave it a feeling of kind of being more grounded. So I think their renovations did a nice job of bringing back some of the elements of old Comiskey that made it memorable and nice. You know, there was something really charming about that brickwork that I'm sorry I never saw a game there. I saw it before it was torn down, but I never saw a game there. But there's something really charming about that richness. And I think some of the changes that they made in Chicago are trying, you know, or whether they were intentionally trying to recapture that or whether they were just trying to capture that feeling of intimacy again was have been good changes.
I always thought it was built a year or two too early, actually.
Maybe.
Mhm.
I would think, given your appreciation of Camden Yards and your work on it, that you would have a high opinion of Coors Field in Denver.
That
'Cause
I would what?
Coors Field in Denver.
Oh yeah, no, I think it's a really magical place.
I thought there were no two stadiums. Maybe I'm no architectural expert, but I thought that no two major league stadiums remind me of each other as much as Camden Yards and Coors Field.
Yeah. Well, I think Lodo, as they call the area in Denver, is very much like Baltimore's the Ridgely's Delight neighborhood, architecturally and with the brick and the train station and all those things that Denver did when they put the Rockies facility there. And of course they are positioned so that they've got that beautiful backdrop, but it's a building that's really aged well and I think has proved to be elastic too. I think when Populous was brought in a few years ago to make the modifications to reduce the reduce the seat count. I don't know, they reduce it and take some of those upper deck seats out and create the rooftop, that they did a really nice job of doing surgery on that building without leaving a scar. You know, it's really a nice addition and a gentle massage to a really beautiful building.
Anybody else? I know Janet Marie has to run.
Yeah, I've got the advantage of having a baseball game going on just a block away that I've got to go slide back in and watch the end of. So I came over here where it was quiet because even though I thought this was a group that would probably appreciate the fact that there was a sound system and some balls and strikes in the background, that it wouldn't be very conducive to a conversation. So I found a quieter spot.
We are grateful. We know you'll probably be speaking next summer at SABR 50. Finally, when it's in Baltimore. And we look forward to celebrating, obviously.
I'm looking forward to that too. I'm going to send you, I'm going to look up the link for Luz Barretto's graphics and send them to you so you can share them with this group, because they really are amazing, and he'll be pleased to know that you noted that.
Excellent. So we're glad we had.
Well, thank you very much for having me. And again, Perry, it's always a treat to see you, even if it's just on Zoom.
Well, she's wonderful too. She comes to a lot of our Baltimore Zoom events these days, so we're grateful to have her. And I'm grateful that not only do we have Camden Yards, but because we have Camden Yards, we no longer have Veterans Stadium, which was the first facility I ever saw as a child. So being from Penn, I was happy when that went to the ground. So thank you guys for joining us. We're going to let Janet Marie get back to her Woo Sox game. And I'm going to turn on the TV and watch the Orioles. And I'm sure we'll be in touch. And see you guys all soon. And our next meeting will be the Called Shot Lunch. And Mr. John Burbage will be presenting on Jackie Robinson and his first professional game and time with the with the Dodgers. So you guys are on our email list, and you know how to reach us. You know where I am if you need anything. So thank you, Janet.
Thanks again for having me.
So someday you'll be in here.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
All right, guys. Good night.
Thank you.